10 items, not categories, not vague economic warnings. Specific things sitting on your grocery shelf right now. Pasta, coffee, butter, canned goods, whose prices at the register don't reflect what's already been locked in upstream. There's a gap, and that gap closes before summer. I spent months pulling supply data, crop reports, and commodity numbers that most consumers never see. I mapped exactly which 10 items are sitting inside that window right now, and more importantly, what you can do about each one before the price catches up to reality. One item on this list stopped me cold when I found it. It's something nearly every household in America buys without thinking. We'll get there. Let's count down. Number 10, spices and seasonings. Nobody's first instinct is to bulk up on cumin. I understand that. But stay with me, because this is one of the highest return, lowest risk moves on the entire list. Here's what most people don't know about the spice market. Each spice comes from one or two very specific places on the planet. Black pepper from Vietnam and India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka and Indonesia, cumin from India and the Middle East, paprika from Hungary and Spain. These are interchangeable growing regions. When one has a bad season, there is no backup, no alternative crop, no substitute supply. Over the past 2 years, several of those regions have been hit. Drought in some areas, flooding in others, export restrictions, currency shifts. Not all at once, but steadily, one after another, across the whole category. The result is a quiet, consistent price drift that most shoppers haven't consciously registered yet. If you've grabbed a jar of black pepper recently and felt a small jolt at the price, that instinct was correct. The practical move is simple. Whole spices, peppercorns, cumin seeds, coriander, hold their potency for 3 to 5 years in a sealed container, stored away from heat and light. Ground spices stay perfectly usable for 1 to 2. Open your spice cabinet this week. Identify what's running low. Buy full jars of everything you actually cook with. The upfront spend is small. The protection over the next 18 months is real. And the item right above it is one people have trusted to never let them down. Until now.
Number 9, dry pasta. Pasta has been the financial floor of home cooking for generations. When every other category got expensive, pasta always got you through. That floor is still mostly holding, but something is pushing up against it from underneath, and most shoppers haven't felt it yet. Global wheat markets have been unusually volatile for 2 years. Weather disruptions in major growing regions, shifting trade flows, and energy costs that pushed fertilizer prices sharply upward. All of that flows directly into grain production costs. Manufacturers have been absorbing a large portion of those increases rather than passing them on immediately, because they know raising pasta prices sends shoppers straight to store brands. But there's a ceiling on how long you can absorb rising input costs. We're approaching it. National pasta brands have started what the food industry quietly calls price normalization. That's a polished term for prices going up while they watch how much resistance builds before people switch. The part that closes off the obvious workaround? Store brands are following right behind them. Switching to generic doesn't help when the entire category reprices simultaneously. Dry pasta, stored properly, has an essentially indefinite shelf life. It doesn't spoil, it doesn't go stale. 20 pounds of mixed shapes bought now is 20 pounds of protection against a repricing that's already in motion. Buy it before the increase makes it obvious. By the time it's obvious, the window is already gone.
Number 8, frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables are genuinely underestimated. Nutritionally, they often outperform fresh produce that spent days in distribution. They work in nearly anything: soups, stir-fries, pasta, omelets. And right now, they're still priced at levels that don't fully reflect what's happening in the supply chain behind them. That gap is closing. Cost pressure here is layered. Energy costs for industrial freezing and cold storage have stayed elevated. Labor at processing facilities has risen, packaging costs are up, and the vegetables themselves have faced disruption from growing region stress across California's Central Valley, Florida, and parts of the Pacific Northwest. Why haven't prices moved at the shelf yet? Because large frozen vegetable brands have been absorbing costs rather than passing them through. The private label competition in that aisle is intense. Raise your price, and the store brand 6 inches away wins. But that strategy has a hard limit, and the industry has been quietly signaling a repricing in the second half of 2026. Buy the largest bags of what your household actually uses. The per-ounce cost on bulk sizes is meaningfully better. If you have freezer space, use it now. You're locking in today's price before the adjustment arrives.
Number 7. Rice. Here's something most American shoppers have never had a reason to think about. Rice is the most widely consumed staple food on Earth, and the pricing dynamics of that kind of global demand reach your grocery shelf whether you realize it or not. In 2023 and 2024, several of the world's largest rice exporting countries, including India, the single biggest global exporter, imposed export restrictions. The stated reason was protecting domestic supply. The effect on global markets was immediate. Supply tightened. Importing countries competed harder for what was available. Those higher costs moved through the supply chain to American shelves, and prices spiked. That part made news. What got far less coverage was what happened after. The prices didn't come back down. They settled into a new, higher baseline. The spike became the floor. When commodity prices stop retracing after a supply-driven disruption, it typically signals a structural repricing, not a temporary shift. The conditions that caused the original spike are still in place. Export policy uncertainty, climate stress in growing regions, higher energy costs in processing and transport. None of that has resolved. White rice stored in sealed, food-grade containers keeps for years without quality loss. 2 or 3 large bags bought now is a straightforward decision. You were going to buy it anyway. This is just choosing not to pay more for the same thing later.
Number 6. Canned fish and seafood. The quiet corner of the pantry that almost nobody thinks about strategically. It deserves more attention than it gets. A standard can of albacore tuna delivers roughly 30 grams of complete protein. The cost per gram of protein from canned seafood is still among the lowest anywhere in the grocery store. In a market where beef, chicken, and pork have all risen meaningfully over the past 3 years, canned fish is one of the last real protein bargains standing. The problem is, it's losing that status faster than most shoppers realize. Fishing quotas have tightened in several major fisheries. Fuel costs for commercial fleets have stayed elevated. Global demand has grown, and several major brands have already done something most shoppers haven't noticed, specifically because it was designed not to be noticed. They made the cans smaller. A can that held 6 ounces 2 years ago now holds 5. The label looks nearly identical, the shelf position is the same, the price feels familiar. But what's inside is quietly less than what you remember. And now price increases are starting to layer on top of those size reductions. Paying more for less simultaneously with no announcement. Buy what your household actually eats. Tuna for sandwiches, salmon for pasta. Canned fish keeps for 2 to 4 years without meaningful quality loss. The trend has no near-term reason to reverse. When commodity prices stop retracing after a supply-driven disruption, it typically signals a structural repricing, not a temporary shift. The conditions that caused the original spike are still in place. Export policy uncertainty, climate stress in growing regions, higher energy costs in processing and transport. None of that has resolved. White rice stored in sealed food-grade containers keeps for years without quality loss. 2 or 3 large bags bought now is a straightforward decision. You were going to buy it anyway. This is just choosing not to pay more for the same thing later.
Number 5. Cooking oils. This category has been quietly under pressure for 2 years, and if it hasn't been on your radar, the shift has already been substantial. The most visible part of the story is olive oil. Multiple consecutive poor harvests across Spain, Italy, Greece, and Portugal drove retail prices to levels that genuinely shocked regular shoppers, dramatic enough to break into mainstream financial media, which almost never covers agricultural commodities. Per-liter retail prices roughly doubled from where they were 3 years ago. That part got some coverage. What got far less attention was what it triggered. When olive oil became unaffordable for many households, demand shifted toward canola, vegetable, and sunflower oil all at the same time. That sudden concentrated shift pressured every substitute category simultaneously. And sunflower oil came with its own independent problem: geopolitical instability in Eastern Europe, where a significant share of global sunflower production is concentrated. Every major subcategory was hit at roughly the same time. There was no safe category to rotate into. Retail data from early 2026 shows cooking oils broadly elevated, with no visible downward correction in market signals. Buy the largest format container you can use within 12 months. Oils do go rancid, so don't overbuy, but 1 or 2 large jugs locked in now before summer pricing solidifies is a practical call.
Number 4. Canned tomatoes. This might feel like the most unremarkable item in the top half of this list. That feeling is exactly why it belongs here. Canned tomatoes are foundational. Pasta sauces, soups, chilies, stews, shakshuka. They quietly underpin dozens of meals and sit in the back of most pantries without drawing attention, which is precisely why the price shift happening in this category is so easy to miss. California processes the overwhelming majority of canned tomatoes sold in American grocery stores. The 2025 growing season in the Central Valley faced serious compound stress, heat during critical pollination windows, and water restrictions that have been tightening for years. These disruptions don't show up at the shelf immediately. Supply chain lag means a stressed harvest typically takes 6 to 12 months to translate into visible retail price movement. That lag period is ending right now. Year-over-year price data on standard 28-ounce cans shows a consistent pattern across major retailers. Not one visible jump, but a series of quiet, incremental moves. Food commodity analysts are projecting those increases consolidate into something significantly more visible by midsummer. Here's the signal that matters most. Commercial buyers have already moved. Operators in the restaurant supply channel started building canned tomato inventory months ago because they read the same harvest data available in trade reports. Commercial buyers move early. Retail shoppers move last. You don't have to move last. A full case, 24 cans before the end of May. Canned tomatoes keep for 2 to 3 years. When you reach for one in October and the shelf price is noticeably higher, you'll know exactly why this was worth doing.
Number 3. Infant formula and specialized toddler nutrition. I said at the start that one item on this list would catch you off guard. This is it. And before the supply analysis, for the families this affects, this isn't a budget conversation. The stakes are categorically different, which is exactly why it's on this list. Go back to 2022. A production shutdown at a single facility, Abbott Nutrition's plant in Sturgis, Michigan, cascaded into a nationwide infant formula shortage almost overnight. Not gradually. Parents were driving across state lines to find a specific formula their infant could tolerate. Pediatric offices were fielding panicked calls daily. Some families were forced into improvised alternatives that no parent should face. By any reasonable standard, it was a public health emergency. The industry responded after the fact. Capacity expanded, inventory protocols tightened, import pathways opened for European brands meeting FDA standards. But here's what didn't change. The US infant formula market is still dominated by 2 or 3 manufacturers. That level of concentration means a disruption at any single facility doesn't create a regional problem. It creates a national shortage, almost immediately, because there's no distributed redundancy to absorb the gap. And in early 2026, new pressure has emerged specifically on specialty formula categories. Tariff changes on imported goods have introduced both pricing friction and availability friction for European brands. These are not in.
Number 2. Butter. Butter has been changing slowly enough that most people haven't registered it as a change. A few years ago, you grabbed a pound without glancing at the price. It was one of those staples that just cost what it cost. That era ended quietly. And based on what the data shows, it's not coming back. The price of a standard 1-pound package has risen significantly across the category, not at one brand, not at one retailer. This is a dairy economic story that took years to develop and will take years to resolve. Feed costs for dairy herds went up, processing costs went up,
packaging and cold chain logistics went up. Butter absorbed more of that pressure than most other dairy products because of where it sits in the processing chain relative to fluid milk and cheese. Retail data from early 2026 shows butter prices well above their 5-year average, with no visible correction signal on the horizon. Dairy supply chains don't adjust quickly. Herd sizes don't change overnight. Processing infrastructure takes years to build. When butter prices rise in this industry, they tend to hold at the new level for a long time before any relief reaches the shelf. The practical move? Butter freezes. Wrapped in its original packaging, sealed inside a heavy-duty freezer bag, butter holds full quality for up to a year. When you thaw it, there's essentially no difference. 2 to 4 pounds bought now and frozen is locking in today's price against a category that has given no indication it plans to come down. It's not a luxury item, it just started being priced like one. Act before today's price starts to feel like a memory.
Number 1. Coffee. Everything else on this list matters, but this one is different. Not because the others aren't real, because the coffee situation right now combines 3 things that no other item on this list has simultaneously. The largest documented commodity price movement, the longest structural recovery timeline, and the biggest gap between what's already happened upstream and what the retail price currently reflects. Here's what's actually going on. Coffee grows in a narrow geographic band around the equator. Brazil and Vietnam together account for the majority of global production. Both have experienced serious disruption over the past 2 growing seasons, and the effects have been compounding rather than stabilizing. Brazil, the world's single largest coffee producer, had consecutive seasons hit by drought during critical flowering periods, followed by frost at precisely the wrong time. Back-to-back stress of that kind is not a normal pattern. Vietnam, the dominant producer of Robusta beans used in espresso blends and most instant coffee, faced its own independent yield collapse. The combined result? Global coffee inventories fell to historically low levels, and the commodity price for green coffee beans, the raw material every roaster on Earth purchases, roughly doubled between 2023 and early 2026. Let that land. The primary input cost for every bag of coffee on every grocery shelf in America roughly doubled, and your grocery store price hasn't reflected that yet. This isn't an error, it's a delay. Coffee roasters buy green beans months in advance and hold inventory buffers. They entered 2025 drawing on contracts priced at older, lower levels. Those buffers are running out. As roasters exhaust their lower-cost inventory and replace it with beans purchased at current commodity prices, the full cost has to flow through to retail. There is no mechanism that stops it.
The thread that runs through all 10. Here's what connects every item on this list. We're in a period of multi-source, persistent supply disruption. The cause is different for each one. Climate stress in one place, trade policy in another, concentrated supply chains, compounding input costs. But the retail outcome follows the same sequence every time. Costs rise upstream. Manufacturers and retailers absorb them for a while because visible price increases change shopping behavior. Then, the absorption runs out. Prices move. And the lag between what happened upstream and what appears on the shelf is typically 6 months to a year, sometimes longer. That lag is the window. That window is open right now. The people who act on this aren't doing anything extraordinary. They're looking at the same information wholesale buyers and commodity traders already have and applying it to their own household, the way commercial operations apply it to theirs. You now have that information. This isn't about fear. It's not about buying things you never normally buy or overhauling how you live. It's about buying what you were already going to buy, now instead of later, and buying a modest amount more because the next 6 to 12 months favor the household that moved on real information over the one that waited for the obvious signal. 12 months from now, when the people around you are absorbing grocery increases they can't quite explain, you'll have absorbed less of it because you made a few deliberate decisions in May of 2026. Most households will feel this shift. Fewer will have seen it coming.
You're now in the second group. Which item are you buying first?